Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Bowen Center's February professional lecture. It's my honor to introduce tonight's speakers, Katie White and Dixie Vandersluys. Dixie Vandersluys is a Canadian Certified Counselor based in Manitoba, Canada. Dixie has undergraduate degrees in history and philosophy and a Master of Arts in Counseling from Providence Theological Seminary. Dixie enjoys seeing clients across Canada in her private practice, Storybrook Therapy. Dixie is also a faculty member at Living Systems Counseling and Training and is creator and host of the Elevator Systems podcast. And Katie White is a marriage and family therapist registered in the US and Canada. She's been working with individuals, couples, and families in schools, clinics, and nonprofit centers for 20 years in the US, Australia, and Canada. In 2010, Katie began focusing her practice using Bowen family systems theory and has attended the postgraduate program at the Bowen Center. Katie is currently the executive director of Living Systems, a nonprofit organization in Vancouver, Canada, which focuses on Bowen theory in its training and counseling practice. Katie teaches and supervises interns there, as well as managing a private practice in Vancouver. All right. Thank you so much for being here, Katie and Dixie. I will turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm going to share my screen here. Oh, here we go. That works? Yes. All right. Welcome, everyone, tonight. I think it's lovely to hear you. We're going to start the way we always start our podcast, if all of our tech is going to work out well. We want to welcome you to our talk this evening on thinking theory in an elevator.
And elevator systems. Bowen family systems theory in brief for a life of learning.
Dixie could give you a start with a fun fact of where that came from.
That came from copyright-free music on the internet, but also my son helped me piece together the ding and the door noises and the music that was just cheesy enough to be elevator music, but all copyright free, so it's all good. But my son helped me.
Oops. So we'd like to start with talking a little bit more about what is an elevator pitch.
Yeah, so dictionary definition of an elevator pitch, it is a succinct, brief summary to spark interest or persuade. And that persuade word needs to be addressed, I think. But the elevator pitch idea came from several years ago. I was meeting with my doctor about something, and he was asking about the work that I was doing, and I fumbled my way through it. And he said, you should have a way to say that in 30 seconds, in 2 minutes, and 30 minutes. And so that reminded me of the elevator pitch, which I think is very, very useful. The history of the elevator pitch is in the 1850s. You could find this picture online. Elisha Otis was developing safety mechanisms around elevators, and he was showing, while he's standing on this elevator, he's giving this pitch about how this is going to work, and the guys are setting up these safety mechanisms. So that's one way that it's been used. And then in like the 60s and the 80s, the classic thing is that I think it was, they talk about bank and film people would get their minute with the executives on the elevator ride, and they had the length of that ride to pitch their ideas. So that's the broad history of the elevator pitch. But really for us, the idea is brevity, not persuasion. And so the idea of the podcast was really, I think the first email I ever sent out about it was, I'm interested in starting a podcast on Bowen theory that can relate the theory to regular people. And so it's just getting the ideas of theory clear and relatable. You can see here, like, it's a way to define a person's thinking. I've found these short, succinct little comments, they help me make sense of things, not to like simplify, but as a starting point, to understand more. So how to capture a big concept briefly, thinking about how will this, how to help people hear it, to reduce some of the jargon, and that the podcast really is an introduction of Bowen theory. It's a starting point for people, and it's not to sell the theory. Your turn,
So
Katie.
we thought it would be useful to have all of you in this room give this a try and see what it's like, see the effort and energy. Many of you who are in this room, I know, have tried this out and have been on our podcast. So you've had a go at this, but it is a process to try and think of what does it take to make an elevator pitch. So we thought in the background, hopefully that doesn't draw too much of your attention away from what we're saying this evening, but we'd like you to think about an elevator pitch for Bowen family systems theory. So if you had to give us 2 sentences to say what's important about Bowen family systems theory, what would that be? So I wanted to put that out there in the background. And then when we come to the end, we're going to ask you to share it in the chat. So we'll do that right at the end. But I thought that would be just a useful exercise for you guys in the room to say, how do we do this? What's a quick way to say to someone, here's what this Bowen theory thing is about?
Mm-hmm.
So I think Dixie's going to tell us a little bit about where this idea came from, because it was her creation.
Yeah. Well, like I said, it started probably 5 years before I had maybe even really. No, I guess I knew Bowen theory a little bit, but it kind of started in that doctor's office. He's like, you gotta figure out how to say this quickly. But the original podcast idea started in May of 2023. I was at the end of my second year postgraduate training at Living Systems, and I had sent off an email to my instructors that year with this idea of, and I had it sort of figured out of, people give a pitch, they give an example, and they give something that people can think about as you know, in their daily life. And I got some like mixed responses, and I am quite human, and so I can very easily rise and fall over the responses of people. And something about it, I stuck with it. And so like a year later, the idea of it just still seemed useful to me. And so I followed up with Katie in May of 2024, and she, you know, thought it was a good idea. Seemed, maybe, I don't know, Katie, if you remember that, if you remember what made my May 2024 email more effective.
I can say that, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. I think I was able to really find a project for myself in this. In teaching, I thought it would be such a useful challenge to think about a way to say these ideas more clearly and concisely than I had been doing. So that's really what hooked me in. And I always have an interest in what is the ways to get Bowen theory out in the world more.
Yeah. So that was,
I don't know if anyone's noticed, but podcasts are kind of a thing right now. So it seemed like a good time.
They're a Golden Globe category.
Yes.
So look at that. So in May and June of 2024, we did some like logistical work finding the right platform, and a big shout out to Jenny Brown, who told us about the Riverside program that she uses for her podcast. I created that little intro with my son. We did a test run of an episode, and in fact, we did three times we recorded the anxiety episode. So trying to figure out how to do it. In June of 2024, Kathleen Smith was our first guest trying out the recording platform that we use. And then in August of 2024, we launched our preseason episode explaining the podcast and started with season 1. And I did want to like say that, it's Katie and I that are on the podcast, but we have Dave from Living Systems who has helped a lot with tech, and Mabo is our social media person. So some other people as well.
Takes a village.
Yeah.
So I think that the other part that I wanted to say about where this began is once Dixie had the idea and we thought about this and we kind of worked through some of the tech drama, it was thinking about who to invite on this podcast. So the other part was that pitch, right? That was part of an elevator pitch, is how do I communicate this idea and begin to ask people in the network about their interest in participating. So I am just a regular human, as Dixie said. So I started by asking people that I knew that, would, the friendlier one-to-one that I already had one-to-one relationships with, and I asked them to be a part of this. And I think one of the joys has been for me in this is then I started asking people I had heard of or had seen present somewhere and got interested in building relationship and really exposing people to folks across the network. So that's where it's taken out. And I think as we talk about the evolution towards the end of what the next season is about, it's really looking at people who have thought a lot about a certain topic in Bowen theory to expose that to the world. So that's part of the next phase where we had to think about who would be willing to be on this podcast.
So here is the structure and the format of every episode. If you've been on the podcast, you have received copy and pasted these exact words. So the podcast itself there's a clear structure, but it's also quite conversational within that structure. So we ask for people to come with a pitch, and Katie and I bring one as well. And then we also draw on some, Dr. Bowen, often some other theory thinkers to give their, just like Katie asked at the beginning, a 2 to 3 sentence, really clear description of the topic of the episode. And then also to come with an example from life, from clinical work, or I love to use movie examples. So we'll each have an example generally, and then something that we haven't done maybe quite as much over the past 2 seasons, but certainly at the start, we asked people what is important or useful about this idea. What the way, for example, Bowen theory looks at anxiety versus, a diagnosis of anxiety that people will think of, what's useful about that? And then finally, we end the episode with a takeaway, which can be a question, an idea, a resource to have people, if they want to do more thinking on the topic, they have those things as well.
And then,
and then at the end of every episode, if you please sometimes watch on YouTube, or I think the videos show up on Spotify now, watch to the end, because the doors open and you go out into the world. And I mean, that's the idea of theory. I was in group supervision today, and my supervisor commented, like, we know this theoretically, it's very different to live it out in the world. So that is the sort of the invitation, is to go out and observe.
And I think that's the idea, is that unlike some other podcasts that I myself enjoy and listen to that are really about telling people what to go out and do and giving advice and protocols depending on what you're doing, we are really just encouraging an effort to go out and think and observe and just get interested in the ideas behind and think for yourself about them. So really thinking about having a project for oneself was the key part of this. So I really wanted to turn a little bit to this idea of, there was a real importance that Dixie and I spoke about when we began this, of the importance of grounding this work in the theory. So not just talking about the theory, but having the podcast have a thinking about the theory. So for me, that work would be around differentiation. So how do 3 people present others with ideas that they can then go forward and do their own thinking and research about in their lived experience, not taking our ideas and making it the basis for their thinking. So really, as I said, my own personal project was I took on this theory because I wanted the challenge of getting clearer and more concise with the theory. I had been teaching for a few years at that point, and I found that this was something that was a real important effort for myself to get clearer and more concise in the work in the theory. And I think that the interest that Dixie originally proposed is just hearing from people who have done this work for some time. So an effort to really connect with people who had been working in the theory and see what has been useful to them, what they've learned, what they've thought about. And so I really have found that the effort, I mean, this, unlike just maybe showing up and saying, here's my thinking of the day. I mean, my own effort in this is I sit with the idea, I do some writing, I do a little bit of research, and I think about it. So there's an effort that goes into this process that's more than just sitting up and saying, what's the topic of the day the moment before the camera goes on? So I think that really is some effort. And I know I've heard from our guests that the effort to go in and think about and really be challenged, but the way that you get clear for yourself about these ideas. And I think, for my own thinking about the grounded in the work in theory is I've really been interested in watching where it takes my thinking, areas where I get curious. I listen to a guest and I go do some research, or I share some thinking in a class I'm teaching. My efforts at the symposium that I presented in November at the Bowen Center was really out of my thinking about this podcast and ideas around individuality and togetherness, which we'll talk about in a later today. But I think that that's other parts of this where this work has grown into other projects. And then I really appreciate, and what I've heard from people is that leading with a challenge. I mean, I think that I like a good challenge. And I think part of what's been useful to me is to think about, where do I take this? Where do I see myself using this in my own work in my life? Or where do I see myself using this as a clinician, and taking that into life for people? So a project for yourself, I think, is something that we really try and talk a lot about within the podcast. Dixie, would you have something to add there?
Yeah, well, I think for me, my own work on differentiation has been like like I said before, these one sentence summaries are really helpful as a base to expand from, not to minimize. And I think being clear without oversimplifying, I think that is a challenge, but it's also been helpful for me in understanding the theory, and then really seeing it at work in my life. I think one of the things that, and maybe we'll talk more about this at the end, but managing myself, breathing the same Zoom air as experts, people who have studied the theory since before I was born, that's been a workout, and and it's been good to see myself grow in that capacity. And one thought that I had as I was a bit anxious preparing for a recording last week of the podcast was what do I bring to this conversation? Just what do I know? What do I bring? I can't know everything. And so what do I bring, and how does the limits of my learning, but my genuine curiosity, how can I come at this with curiosity instead of panic of all that I don't know?
I think that's important. And how we give examples of how we are all working. I mean, I appreciate that on the podcast, is people giving examples of how they're doing this work in their own life. So we thought now would be a good time if people had burning questions with just what we mentioned. On our questions, we've put little clips of little clips of the podcast. So you'll be able to see little clips. If you haven't watched the podcast yet, that's one where we were talking about the archives, and one where we interviewed Monica McGoldrick, which I was trained as a marriage and family therapist. So that was a little bit of fangirl moment for me. And I think let's raise your hands if you have questions, and I will call on you. I am not Seeing anyone? All right. Oh, Heather.
Hi there, Katie. Hi there.
Hi, Heather.
I am thinking about something that's been on my mind. Um, I have been wondering about the potential for overfunctioning to occur in teaching, and I'm wondering if either of you have thought about that in the process of creating this podcast.
Yes. Can I hold that thought and see if we don't answer it in the next segment?
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. I'm making a note. Any other questions? All right. I will move on to Dixie's going to tell you a little bit, if you aren't familiar with the podcast, what this has looked like thus far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like I said, we started in August 2024, and season 1 was really just sort of a basic introduction to Bowen family systems theory, to systems thinking, anxiety. We did the 4 mechanisms, we did the family diagram, and then we did a couple episodes on differentiation of self. And then, so that was 10-ish episodes plus our introduction. And then season 2, Katie really, it was Katie's suggestion, which I think was a great one, to go through the concepts. And I mean, multi-generational transmission process, like you can hardly say that in 30 seconds, let alone come up with an elevator pitch, right? So that was a helpful episode, but I think I had 50 pages of notes. No, it was season 3. I had 50 pages of notes of my script for the episodes, but a lot of reading and research, because those are important. And so that was season 2. And then at the end of that season, I had a client who had listened through to the podcast, and he said, so I've listened to your podcast. What is a relationship system? Like, what are you guys talking about? And I'm like, well, after 20 episodes, that seems like something that's pretty important to know. So we did a special episode at the Living Systems. Is that our AGM, Katie, that we recorded it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So with Ron Richardson and Lois Walker, so we had that special episode. And then season 3 was 18 episodes about across the lifespan, relationships across the lifespan. That was also a bit of a workout, 18 episodes in 18 weeks. And then we ended that with an episode that came out a month or 2 after that, talking with Dr. Monica McGoldrick, who wrote a very pretty famous textbook about relationships across the lifespan. So those are the 3 seasons we've done. I think it's 43 episodes for those. And then we started season 4.
I see Philip's hand raised. Philip, do you want to throw in a question here? No?
I think you're muted, Philip.
You're still muted.
Okay.
Here we go.
Oh, let's see. I think it was Dixie spoke a minute ago about anxiety, about not knowing everything. And so I'm also experiencing that a little bit. And I just want to say that I am making an effort to open more to the process of enjoying, acknowledging, not knowing everything, and in some ways that not knowing and having to answer all the questions that come up in life is a freeing aspect, and it gives more faith, you might say, for thinking to blossom in a way. A couple more thoughts. Okay, while I'm thinking on this, at some point, maybe you will give contact information for the podcast. I am interested in connecting with that group. And one of the things that I've been recently that I'm working at is expanding my exposure to more systems and more views. And I've been in a Bowen group for probably 30 years, and it's been very beneficial. I'm down in Florida that I'm a group with Mary Spear and Mary Steves were the teachers and leaders in that group. But I'm getting more interested in trying to create links to other systems, like and exposing myself even to a few more Bowen model teachers and seeing the variations that are expressed in those by different teachers.
Yeah.
And
well, I hope that you do listen to the podcast, because I think it will be interesting to hear your feedback on hearing different people who are working in Bowen theory, and see how, there's times that people think differently and express that.
Yes. Last comment, if I can tie this together, something else that I'm recently becoming very interested in is tying in my thinking process to things like, say, Lunar New Year that's coming up, and looking at the systems that's in a conflict with myself, because my son is married to a wonderful lady that's from Taiwan, and the family of origin issues and communication in the family has been at times strained, probably more so because of my questioning, and there's political differences that I have tried to explore that have bitten me rather bad, and I'm trying to take a different approach instead of a direct getting in conflictual relationships over political processes.
Fair.
So,
Philip, can I leave you with that one, and we can come back if you have other questions? Perfect. So okay. I'm going to move to part of Dixie has already talked a little bit about, is that we do have other voices that come onto our podcast. So one of the other voices is the 23 guests that we have had over our seasons. We started with a model where we had people do 2 episodes, and then as we went along, I don't know if the jury's out on Dixie, if that went added an easier process or a more complicated process. But the last season we had a different person for every episode. So a few folks have made it to multiple seasons. Shout out to our friends of the podcast that have been willing to come on each season. And so that's one thing, is picking these guests from other folks who are in the Bowen network. The other thing that obviously shows a prominent view in our podcast is, Dixie has taken efforts to try and find what would be Dr. Bowen's pitch. So really thinking through, looking at family therapy and clinical practice and the writings there that we've seen. We bring in other writers who have written around Bowen theory to add to that comment. So idea of other pitches that come in. And then I had this idea when I was listening to I'm going to get this acronym, sorry. The archives, the Murray Bowen Archives Project, that to bring in voices from the archives. And I was listening to them talk about their scholarship offer and interested in finding ways for people to connect with the archives. And then I had the opportunity to talk to Elise when we were at the Bowen Center together, and just say, what would you think about this idea of putting out things from the archives? And it's been a really fun project to they know the material, part of efforts that Dixie
Mm.
really has put into this is she scours over material to find things that fit our topic. So to have the assistance of the Archives Project and the folks there really coming up with things, and even, connecting, Elise talked about the one that we did on pets. Like, she went out and connected with someone who wrote a paper on Bowen theory and pets and was able to access that paper to us, which was really interesting. So again, just the benefit to connecting people to these resources that they might not otherwise know about. Each guest that has come on has exposed us to different materials that we might not otherwise get. So that's just a real privilege that I've enjoyed. And then the show notes that Dixie puts a lot of time and energy. So please, if you've never looked at our show notes, all of the things,
Make it worth
all of
my
the
time.
resources that we talk about. Yeah. All of the resources that we talk about during the podcast are linked in the show notes. So you can go onto the archive site. And actually, I just saw the archives put up a nice connection on their website to look at how our podcast and where to go find the material that the quote comes from there. So really thinking through, how do we get people interested if they are interested? And I think I'll tie this back to Heather's question about overfunctioning, because I think it's interesting to say, what's the difference between telling people how to think and just providing them some resources and deciding how they want to think about it. I mean, one of the advantages what I have in teaching is I get to have that engagement. And I'll talk about one of the interesting things about the podcast is it goes out there, and I don't know where it lands. There's some times where people will get in touch with me and talk about an episode. It'd be interesting. I've never polled our guests if other people have reached out to them to talk with them about what they said on the podcast. But part of that is that effort to say, here's some material, take it or leave it, see where the thinking is that drives up for you. So I think that's been really cool for me to get exposed to something that would take me a lifetime. I mean, the archives, if you've taken a dive, there's a lot of information there. So just to be able to hear some of these things throughout the podcast has been a real gift.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're going to see how well my tech works, and Dixie's going to walk you through the episodes.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, the format for every episode is the same, and it's pretty loose within that. I think the other day we talked a real long time before we got to the examples, and then sometimes the examples take most of the episode. So yeah, we just have some short clips of each of them. So we'll start with Kathleen Smith giving us a pitch.
When you were here last, your elevator pitch was 10 words or less, maybe. So did you do that again, or?
I've got 4 words.
Wow, even better.
What? So my pitch for your relationship with your parents and or caregivers is Olympic training for objectivity is what I came up with.
So there's the pitch.
Right. So 4 words. She does expand on it after. But I think that might be the shortest pitch that we've had. And so, yeah, Katie and I then follow with a pitch, and I'll give, a quote from Dr. Bowen and other people. And then we say, what do you notice in all those pitches and what stands out? And that's where the conversation starts. All right, we have an example of an example with Amy Boast.
The example I thought about is the movie Moana and the other movie Encanto. Both of those are stories of families over generations where by the time the grandchildren are walking the earth, they're inheriting certain expectations. The system is organized around certain ways that all of us exist. And this is the way we are. And in both of those movies, the grandchild is encountering a sense of, but wait a minute, I think about things a little bit differently. I see things a little bit differently. And as that shift in their ability to consider differently for self, they're faced with a tension point. Do I continue to pursue my own way of being? Do I just lose my way of being to get along with this group? In both cases, these young girls found where they pursued their own way of being, but continued to stay in relationship with the rest of the family. They ultimately figure out how to both be very strong, clear, wise leaders from self as they relate to other. To me, that sets up the arc of what differentiation can produce.
All right. And then finally, we end each episode. Each of us will bring a question, an idea, or a particular resource to that people can think about as they go out. So we have a takeaway with Selden.
I would like to put in 2 questions that Mike Kerr asked one day in the Princeton Family Center training program way back. He said, I have 2 questions for you today. What are you trying to accomplish? And how do you want to represent yourself?
Great questions.
Great questions. And they're really guidelines for almost anything you do, which is amazing.
Great. It kind of tracks with my, what do I bring to this conversation? I must have just changed the words to Selden's questions there. Good. So that is the format of the show, with a lot of conversation, and then they're usually 35 to 50 minutes, depending on the day. So we wanted to highlight some stats. Is that what's next, Katie?
That is what's
The
next.
example I thought about was
sorry, I didn't know how else to get past that. So we're going to the place of, some people want to see the data. So here's the data, the hard data of what we found about the podcast. The useful thing I will plug in here about doing things on platforms that involve tech is they like to collect lots of data. So we have some data for you. So where are people listening? So our data shows that our largest audience, not surprisingly, is from the United States, with Canada, or with Australia. Thank you, Australians in the room. I saw some this evening. Our second largest location, and then Canada being the third. But we also see people that are joining from other places around the world. So really just interesting to see that people are finding us in various places. I'm going to turn it over to you, Dixie.
Yeah, what's the next one? This is, I'm trying to think if this is from, does anyone know by the colors if it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts? I think it might be Apple Podcasts. But anyways, it will tell you the gender and the ages of your demographic. So a high percentage of female listeners, which I guess is maybe not surprising in this sort of field of things. But probably quite interesting is looking at the age group, and 45 to 59. I mean, that's Katie's in my demographic, so maybe that makes sense. But also quite high in the 35 to 44. So yeah, just interesting to see who's listening.
Yeah. And I think that was one of our efforts, just to think about, does this format get Bowen theory out into the world with a younger audience? Because I think that is an interest that I have personally. So here is some nice little beautiful stats on total viewing data. I don't know if you can see, is my cursor there?
Yeah.
Or no? Yeah. Okay. So this is the total number. This is from Spotify. So we've had 18,000 streams and downloads of the episode since it's begun. This one's on YouTube, right?
Yep.
And this is YouTube. We've had a total of 7,666 views. And this is just, for those of you that like to watch these things, this is just the actual, it breaks down the data from 2024 to 2026 of kind of watching when we have these peaks and valleys about who's accessing the episodes. And then our top YouTube episodes are listed here. So the ones that have on YouTube gotten the most watching are Triangles with Jenny Brown, Multi-Generational Transmission Process, another episode on triangles, just interesting. People are looking to learn more about triangles. Togetherness with Kathleen Smith, and then Distance with Jenny Brown. So looking at, and this has varied from time to time because I've checked this stat at a different time, and different episodes have been the top ones. So it's interesting to kind of see where people are staying longer, where people are interested. I mean, I think just it's useful to hear where people are curious and when they're moving towards theory.
And it's not just which ones I email to clients that this would be helpful. there's some variation there. So
so pulling this together, I
yeah.
was thinking, what does this data say about our goals for the podcast? So as I've said, like the format extends our reach beyond what Living Systems has been able to do otherwise. For us to regularly being connecting out in the world with folks that we wouldn't otherwise see show up at maybe our conferences or our talks or register in our program, I think that's really interesting. One of my perks, I think, is that we're getting a younger audience listening. I mean, I grew up I was trained in the late 90s, early 2000s around family therapy. And I think that Bowen theory was much more of a relevance in textbooks for family therapy. And I actually know that in the past couple of years, like Bowen has become less of a dominant figure in textbooks. So if people who are younger aren't being exposed to this in various ways, this just hopefully gets people another venue. I think there's lots of other people in the Bowen community that do a great job of connecting with other people, but I think that's one way that we do that. It's also short. I'm going to go to a feedback slide, but I think one of the things people really appreciate it, and as someone who does not have time for a 2-hour podcast, that people appreciate that these are generally less than 45 minutes. So really we work to have it be what we're delivering, which is that elevator pitch, and that there's no cost access. So again, it's a way to hear about Bowen theory. I know these professional lectures are also part of that effort to give people a no cost access to the theory. So this is a way we see our data connecting with those goals we have. Mark, I see your hand. I have a slide and questions, and can you hold for 2 slides? Okay. So this is some of the feedback. I didn't take any real data. I didn't do this in a formal way. I've just talked to various people, or people have approached me and thinking about it. And this is some of the feedback we had, where people have liked the conversational nature. We've had some criticism that it doesn't go into enough depth. A great way to introduce new people to theory. There's some conversation, which we're going to talk a little bit more about later, where there's too much togetherness. I've heard some feedback. The examples have brought the theory to life, help people understand. I've had a lot of feedback that people have felt that the examples that each episode talk about have really helped them understand the concepts better. So that's been useful in just hearing that feedback. Not enough linking of the concepts has been some criticism that, we talk about our earlier episodes really are talking about one concept in isolation. And those of us who have worked in the theory would know that that's not how it works, that they are all interconnected. People have really been excited about hearing what others are doing in the theory. So bringing other guests and letting them hear from other guests across the world. And then people have talked about it's been a tool that they've been able to give to clients, which, I've heard some people talk about how client, one-on-one work with a family can be move faster if people really get some training and teaching in the theory. So that's a great resource. I don't know if that's how other people are using it, but that's some feedback. And then the brevity, I think, is one of the things that we've heard from folks. One person talked about to me that they kind of they put it on as they're driving to their clinical day, and it just puts their head in the theory a little bit. So that was useful to hear too. So questions. There's our favorite fun pets episode where this is probably a little outtake where my dog was not really interested in sitting on my lap to even record the 5 seconds that we did.
Yeah.
But let me hear some questions. Mark.
Well, it's a question in part, but it's as much about a comment about making it easier for people to access the theory. So you and Amy did a great presentation for a group of family lawyers in Victoria last month. And having this sort of a resource is a great way to give people the links to that, people who are not necessarily going to sit down with a book or go to a day-long conference, that we can whet their appetite with these kind of brief forays into the theory, and then they can go from there to research it more. So I appreciate that. And also I think not only is it interesting the people that you've had presenting, but I think that your personality and Dixie's personality, there's just a lot of fun energy there. So it makes it a great experience for people. So I appreciate that.
Thanks, Mark. I think theory can be fun. Any other? Oh, Sandy.
I came upon your podcast about 6 or 8 months ago, and I gather monthly with a group of clergy in the ELCA that we've worked together through the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America Systems Academy. And I echo what Mark just said. It's been tremendously helpful. And we have begun starting our monthly get togethers, preparing, before we meet with that elevator pitch on whatever topic we're talking about. And it's just enough of, of a prep that allows us to get into things pretty quickly, and isn't overbearing homework. So I just love that you have made this accessible to so many of us. Um, I'm hoping you're going to kind of share with us what season 4 is going to be focused on.
Thanks, Sandy. Yes, it will. And I have lots of questions, so maybe I'll connect with you online and hear a little bit more about how it's been useful to just do that elevator pitch. I appreciate that. Thank you. Any other questions? All right, we're going to take a turn. Oh,
one more.
Brad.
One more.
Yes, my question is apocryphal or not that Murray Bowen's elevator pitch was quit your bitching and brighten your corner of the world. Is it a true story?
That one I don't know.
So we've all inherited a world of what's that famous quote?
Inherited it, yeah. Tribulation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Brad. Maybe someone in the room
Okay.
has heard that.
That's what I was wondering if some expert knows that.
Yeah, well, yeah. So if someone has heard that one, that would be interesting. Harold.
Yes, I was given your format that you had. I see you had an example of pitch, example, and takeaway. What about use? Do you have an example of how you use use in the podcast?
How we use use?
Yeah, what is important? What is
the usefulness? Yeah.
Oh, Dixie, do you want to take that?
It's been a while. Yeah, it's been a while since we have. I wish I had my 80 pages of notes sitting in front of me. I'm trying to think of maybe one that comes to mind. It was way back in season 1, but what difference does having a systems perspective make? And so I think it probably would dovetail off of an example, but when I sit with a systems perspective versus blame, what is the difference in that? And so I think that sort of way that we have talked about how it makes a difference. Would you have anything to add, Katie? That's sort of what we mean by usefulness.
Oh, okay.
Was that helpful?
Yes, very helpful. Thank you.
Sure. So Stephanie. Oh, you're muted, Stephanie.
Well, it's so fascinating to listen to this. I'm sort of wanting to go back to Dr. Kerr's question and ask you, what are you trying to accomplish here?
Yes. Hold that thought. I think that's what this next segment is about, is thinking of tying this back to theory.
Yeah. But as you're speaking, I'm thinking about the training program that I've been part of in Chicago, Center for Family Consultation. And I've been teaching in that and attending those training meetings for many years. And what you're doing on the podcast is sort of the same kind of thing, except it's just sort of at an introductory level. It seems like you're trying to get people thinking. You're trying to put out an idea that will look useful and relevant, and a person begins to see something in their life. I think with triangles, people are amazed to think about how a two-person relationship is being influenced by a third person. So it's just a fascinating thing to think about. How do you know that most people, in order to really make use of the theory, you'd have to get to a deeper level of it. And how do you get people started with your introductions and your stimulating their thinking into more of a long-term effort?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think part of my motivation that I didn't speak about was, when I started teaching in the theory, I've had the gift that I was exposed to, a couple different centers and their trainings. And I just get interested in the different ways people go about communicating this theory and thinking through for myself how I wanted to communicate it. And I think, one of the reason that I'm sitting in this chair today is because I was in Australia in a public mental health facility where Jenny Brown was hired to supervise my supervision. And I told her about a dilemma I was having with a manager and my supervisee. And she explained the concept of a triangle. And I was like, wait a minute. Like, I heard about Bowen theory. I was an MFT. Like, I heard about that. But to be able to connect that example to what I was up against in that moment, I was hooked. I said, tell me, I want to know, I need to know more about this. I need to remember this. And so I think that the tap on the shoulder of here's an idea, I think that's a really unthreatening way, maybe non-threatening way, or just a lighter way that people can enter into the theory. So I hope the podcast can do a little bit of that. And then I think we have this great network where if people do want to learn more, there's lots of places that they can go. So hopefully that is the interest, is it takes people to a space where they want to learn more, try more, connect with a coach. Yeah. Thanks. So turning to the theory and the thinking. So our next segment, we're going to move from really the structure and the stats of the podcast to thinking about the theory that has been embedded in this endeavor. And the place that I'm going to start this is some of the worry that goes into Bowen theory, which is this anxiety around erosion. And, I hope that someone does a whole talk on that one day. So Joe, there's an idea. Get someone to do a whole talk on kind of thinking about erosion ideas, or how do we grow the theory? But this is a quote from Victoria Harrison, and I kind of pulled it and started it. So I observe erosion to occur through trying to be heard. It is one thing to be aware of an audience and assumptions they bring. It is another to bend vocabulary or borrow terms in an effort to create connection or comfort. Effective teaching of Bowen theory challenges an audience to grapple with differences that they do not understand. And so I think, how do we think about anxiety around erosion that is alive and well in Bowen theory? And how do I think about doing my own work on what I can get clear and think about? And one thing about a podcast that I was really thinking about in this presentation tonight and ideas around erosion is I don't get to interact with the audience unless someone phones me up, unless someone, reaches out to me. I am basically, and Dixie is talking to each other and the third person that's in the podcast at that time. So I think that's interesting. One question I had as I was preparing for this is the idea, does that free a person up a bit to put out their thinking, because they're not staring at an audience, you're just looking at the two people in front of you. I could get bogged down with thinking about who's listening to this and who might call me up and say, you've got that wrong. But also, really, my own efforts have been about how do I get clear enough for myself about what this is about, and then communicate that to other people and be interested in hearing about their ideas. So I really want to name this challenge that people talk about in theory, which is erosion, but not let that dominate the process in an anxious way. Because I think it can. I think I've watched that people don't try out things because they worry about misrepresenting the theory. And I hope that people can take some risks and get clear for themselves. And I think that was one of the pieces that I think was a part of this process for us, was taking that risk about putting our thinking out there in this theory in a different way. So that's a part. Dixie, did you want to say anything about that one?
Well, I guess my one thought is that, the thought is the podcast is a starting point. So we do want to make it for people who don't have any background in theory, and yet knowing that a good chunk of the audience are people who have a background in theory. And so it's how do we think about that?
So, Brad.
Just your term erosion. Are you talking about staying true to the theory by using the language that comes with the theory? Is that what you mean by erosion?
I think there's a lot of different thinking that people define erosion about. One thing I said is if you want to read more about this, in the archives, the chapter 48 has a whole segment on Bowen's writings on erosion of the theory and his thinking that he's put out into the world. So, and there's great, there's some articles in the Family Systems Forum. This one comes from the Family Systems Forum, where Victoria's wrote an article about the erosion of the theory. So there's a lot of different ways. I'm not avoiding your question. I think just there's a lot of different ways people talk about that. Yeah, I appreciate the question. So one of the things that I think is a part of the anxiety around this is, does togetherness, those of you who know me will know this is part of my real interest. If you've listened to the podcast, I love to think about togetherness and individuality. And so part of it is, does three people coming together and talking about a concept mean an immaturity in the side of togetherness? So I think the questions that are always a part of our thinking as we're doing this is, how do you hold on to your own thinking in the face of another who is talking about the same concept? What do you share? What do you not share? What do we notice? I mean, I've been really interested to track that. Is if I have different guests on, do I lose my thinking a little bit more than other guests? And what does that tell me? How do I understand that from my own, family of origin? Do I disagree with people? So, I've really appreciated in some of my efforts, my own trainings and postgraduate programs specifically, where I've been able to see people who have studied the theories many, many years longer than I do, have been able to have a conversation to say, I think differently about that. And so I think that that's useful to my own thinking. And what does it mean if we agree? So, is it a negative? I have this bugbear about togetherness is not bad. So I don't think it's a bad thing if we agree on a concept. Part of what scientists do is have to operationally define. If Bowen theory wants to move into research, I think we have to have some agreement on how to operationally define some of these concepts. So as you're sitting here and listening to the podcast or listening to, these questions, do you think when people agree that's togetherness? Do you think when people have a fun time, when they're talking about different ideas in the theory, are you viewing that as more immaturity of togetherness, any fusion? That's, I already said that one about negative descriptors to togetherness. And when can togetherness be useful in moving the theory forward? So a little bit of what I spoke about, this was the proposal I made at the symposium, is how I really think about togetherness as having this immature and mature side. And I have found in my own work that talking with other people about these ideas has been useful to me to get clear for myself. And I think that is a mature side of togetherness, when we collaborate, when we share resources, when we're able to have understanding. But I definitely can hear that there's these other elements when my own immaturity can show up and I don't disagree with someone, or I lose my thinking when I'm on these calls and after these recordings and after the fact, I think, what was I saying there? I should have said that, or thinking about, I think that the podcast has been really useful to me as just another venue to observe my own functioning in the face of these ideas. So I think that I encourage all of you to think through, how do you think about when people sit down and have a conversation? Those of you who have spent years at training facilities or or been a part of, groups that talk about theory. How do you manage and think about your own, how individuality and togetherness is functioning within those contexts? So I think that that's something that's been really useful to me to watch, and it has taken my thinking further around these ideas. Let me make sure if I'm not leaving anything out here. So Dixie, I'm going to turn this one over to you. What has been our learning on these elevator rides?
Yeah, what did I write here? It's been useful for me to read and dig into the concepts, to the theory. It's also been useful to see how I can anxiously over prepare and when to rely on an expert's thinking instead of putting my own thinking into it. And so that's always an effort for me. I think it's kept me more alert to theory stuff in daily life. I like the creativity of it. I don't know, that's just fun for me. I've grown in my capacity to manage the in the moment anxiety, whether it's like live recording tech glitches, or being intimidated. And I've learned lots of new tech skills, so that's been quite useful. A challenge for me would be, like I said, I'd only had 3, formal education years in the theory, and I've done lots of training since, and lots of reading before that, but acknowledging my limited knowledge, but growing and seeing that genuine questions and curiosity could be a resource to the podcast. And yeah, just it's growing in my own understanding has been very helpful. What about you?
Well, I think I've said a lot of things, but one of the things I put on my notes here is that I joke often on the podcast that I can only ride in long elevators. My elevator pitches are often Sears Tower. I know it has a new name, but I know it as the Sears Tower in Chicago, like that big, tall building that I struggle at brevity. So it's my forever workout. I think the other part is to really hear ways I can use this in my other areas of life. So I've really been enjoying that I can take an example. I really appreciate storytelling in the context of my clinical work. And so I've appreciated that I just have this new bag of stories that I can bring into my clinical work that has been really useful. It's work. Like, I think this preparation, it's been interesting to think about how I have committed to this project and making time and space for it. And so I think that's a part of it. And I will say, just from a business standpoint, like really thinking through how we financially support this, right? A podcast. We have a principle that Dixie and I don't pay ourselves for our time and prep in doing it, and we don't pay our guests. We hope that that's a commitment that people are making. But I believe and have a value about paying people to do the editing behind the scenes and paying for the program that we have that runs this. And so really thinking about how we financially sustain the program, which I'm going to make a plug for a little bit later. So thinking about that from a business context of running this and producing this through Living Systems is how we support it financially. And then just really the other part I was going to say is making sure that I'm connected to enough networks that I am exposing lots of people who are thinking in Bowen theory. So how do we expand our reach? Each time we've been putting out some calls. So that's part of our call later is, I think it's a challenge that I don't know everyone who's working in Bowen theory. So how do we just extend the exposure of people who are thinking about ideas. I think we're going to talk about the season that we have upcoming where it's doing a little differently and how we take that on. So those are some of the kind of the learnings and the challenges that have been a part of this process. We learned 18 episodes in a season is too many.
Yes. Yeah. And I think we recorded 5 episodes in 4 days, and that was a mistake.
It was not good.
After the fact. plus working full time.
Maybe you could listen to them and see which week that was. It was a lot.
Yeah.
So I think we
Okay.
wound up solving a little pit here.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the tech because like that's some real new learning for me. So the platform we use is called Riverside, and it is not perfect. The AI that pops up, the transcription is not perfect, and it constantly makes Bowen theory, bone theory, Bone. And so that all has to be changed by hand. The other day it heard Katie say my name, but the number 60 appeared instead of Dixie. So like I said, go to YouTube sometime and make my efforts to make that transcription correct, make it worth it. But so little things like I often forget that some people only listen to this, but because I'm seeing myself while we record, I'll refer to something behind me or I'll make a gesture with my hands, but people don't see that, right? You can do things like take out the ums and ahs in the conversation, or if I think I've said something silly, I might be able to take that out. But how do I thoughtfully think about that instead of just anxiously cut myself out? And then people getting on the platforms, it can be challenging recording live and I'm the host and I have to keep a little eye on the levels of people's sound or how close we are. The example we'll show you here with Phil Cleaver, we realize that if there's a glitch, it normally corrects, but he like dropped off the call and we didn't start over. And so then we were completely out of sync. So he tells a great joke and Katie and I do not respond. So just enjoy this. Never made it to the internet. So
how could you not respond to my bad day and give me what I needed and wanted?
And I appreciate that example, Phil, because that's the kind of stuff where I think it brings maybe some of the concepts, these bigger ideas into this every single couple.
So it did not work well. And Phil so gracefully agreed to re-record with us. But I said, he told this beautiful story about a couple debating about tacos, I think, that I thought was so relatable. And because it is a live podcast, right? He just had a different example the next time he talked. So it's interesting to think about what people bring each time.
Yeah. And then, I mean, I am glad of the possibility for these edits because you can see in the one with Kathleen Colley here, we need it sometimes.
The Bowen, nope, let me start over. The Bowen Community Guide Dogs. Can I start over?
Yes. Oh my God.
Please do.
Monday. Okay.
Yeah. I do have it written and it was sort of clear and then I started talking. Okay. The Bowen, nope.
So yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to edit.
Yes.
Yeah, what about challenges for you, Katie? Or are we doing questions first?
I don't think I had anything. Yeah, I've just appreciated that it is a bit of a heavy lifting. I was joking that today, I was thinking I've been so conscientious of my lighting, and this has been something that has come out of doing this podcast is I have a significant more awareness of the challenges of lighting and the things that are necessary to work on lighting, because that is a thing. If we all look different in our lighting, it's a big extra thing.
Somebody asked me recently, tell me what you use for lighting. And I'm like, I just don't live in Vancouver. I live in a province that has sunlight 80% of the time. So that's my lighting. But yeah, other questions? And then we have one more segment.
Yeah, I'd just be interested if anyone had any thoughts. I don't know if Heather, have I answered your, I would be interested in hearing more about your thinking about the overfunctioning around teaching.
Sure. I was just thinking maybe it's probably more of a theoretical kind of position of how we teach and how people learn. So, the maybe the regular kind of way of teaching is someone talks about a concept and the other person just listens as if they are, not a part of the process and in some way kind of disconnected from it, and even potentially an under-functioning position. And the teacher tells you the thoughts to think about. So I've just been, tossing that around to think about a bit.
Yeah. I think I'm interested. I mean, I get really interested in teaching theory and how do you do that in a way that isn't over functioning. I appreciate that. I probably have lots of thoughts on this. I think that people have to be introduced to an idea. So I think there is a part of that teaching an intro class on Bowen theory, I always am so surprised by, how just the concept of a system and thinking systemically can be pretty mind-blowing for people to absorb and think through. I know Randy Frost is in here. He always used to say in the intro class I took with him that it's like teaching a new language to folks. But I also think that what I appreciate when I'm learning the theory is questions. So my hope is that the questions, people do actually grapple with them and not just absorb and think what I think. I mean, that is my hope in what comes out of this podcast. I don't know, Dixie, if you'd have other things to add.
That's great.
Are there any follow-up?
Not right now. I'm thankful for this conversation, though. I really enjoy the podcast, and I do recommend it to people all the time because I think there's something important about just introducing people to the concepts and seeing what they do.
Yeah. Thanks. Kathleen.
This was a great overview, Dixie and Katie. I would just add from an outreach perspective at the Bowen Center, we're always looking for good content, and I have found this extremely useful as a clinician with clients and as a chair of outreach at the center. It is new, it's fresh, it's bringing in younger people. It is needed for the future, and I'm very grateful for the effort that you two have put into it, and the variety of presentations and the enthusiasm in a relatable way that people are talking about the theory. And I'm not upset at all about any togetherness on the podcast because people can get to the theory, dive deeper, dig deeper, join a training program, and learn about togetherness and individuality. But I'm very, very pleased with the format, and I think that people receive it enthusiastically. So I just want to thank you in a public forum for the time it takes and the effort it takes in as an outreach to the world for Bowen theory. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. I mean, you've been a guest. Can you comment what it's like to sit in the guest seat?
I think the two of you make that easy. I think your interviewing style does that. I also think it affords the guest time to think about the topic, plenty of time ahead. But I think the three-person, it's not a triangle, it's a three-person conversation. And I think that adds an energy. It's very life-giving. It's not, one-to-one can bog down. Certainly a speaker alone can truly bog down. So I find the bouncing off three people to be a very good format, or I wouldn't have signed up to do another one.
Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful for my thinking. Thanks. Charlie.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the thing with Katherine Smith, who did the what she reduced it down to 4 words. What were the 4 words again? Can you give it to me again?
Olympic training for objectivity.
So I think that's a useful exercise, and I also think that if that's pivoting people toward questions, because each one of those words is doing a lot of heavy lifting, okay, and that cannot be the significance of that cannot be under emphasized, because I mean it's really that's a little reductionistic to have people kind of boil things down to 4 words or 5 words or 10 words, and I think so long is that if that's something that provokes through a questioning format where people say, well, I don't really agree with those 4 words. I mean, those 4 words I can say right now, I disagree with one of those words. I think one of those words is fundamentally flawed, in my opinion, from my assessment of Bowen theory. And so I would be like the first to say, well, why did you use that word? Because I think that word, well, not why maybe, but say like that word is loaded and takes you in a certain direction. Likewise, the thing you showed before with about theory erosion. I mean, okay, theory erosion, that's something that can be discussed, but is that relevant today? Or maybe that was relevant 30 years ago, or 40 years ago, but is that relevant today? Particularly as we're heading towards science. I mean, is that really that is as important today as it was, say, 30 years ago? Which when for pre-science and when you were still trying to differentiate ourselves from psychoanalytic theory or other theories that were being pulled around back in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, yeah, theory erosion was a huge issue. But I mean, as we're heading into neurosocial neuroscience, is that as relevant today as it was, say, again, 30 or 40 years ago. So again, that would be, the point I'm making is I think this is a great format. And even though it has, you're running the risk of reductionism here, I think so long as you folks open it up to questions and you really kind of like really charge people to say, okay, you heard this statement being made, what's your thoughts about this? If it stimulates questions and feedback, I think that's a great tool. So.
And I appreciate that, Charlie. And that's my hope is I hope that someone goes away and wants to talk and think more about this. And I think one of my efforts in this coming season is just making sure we do a good enough job of giving people places to land. Right. I think, would someone call up Kathleen? I don't know if Kathleen's on here. I think she is, but call up Kathleen and say, I want to think with you about what you just said. I might think differently about it. And I imagine that's useful for the theory to really just have those conversations. So that would be part of the ways of, I'm open to thinking with folks about how do they get to a space where they can then engage those conversations. Cause I do think that's really important. Mark.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know whether there's been a pivotal moment for either you or Dixie where in the conversation, an idea or a facet of theory came up that had never crossed your mind before, and all of a sudden you had a bit of an epiphany, or anybody in the conversation had an epiphany.
I know the episode with Kathleen Colley on inside and outside positions and triangles really helped me understand. And I don't know if it was her example with the guide dog or something, but that episode really stands out as important in clarifying my thinking.
Yeah, I guess the answer that I thought of is I've had a lot of moments where things were useful and clicked to me, specifically in my own family. And I do have a principle. I've talked to my own family about this and a balance of how much recognizing this is a public forum and how much I respect their privacy and share, but I think one of the things that I found really useful is when I'm talking about something and then I think that makes me think about something in my own family. And then I can go do something about that. So I think that's been one of the other gifts. I can think of a few people off the top of my head. When you asked that question, the first thing that came to my mind is the way Mariana, I've used this like a billion times, Mariana Martinez talked about touching the edges of the system and thinking about cutoff. I have found that I have chewed on that and thought about it so much since she talked about that and her example in her own family. And it was really useful to me. So I imagine I could think of lots of other examples, but that was the one when you asked that question where my brain went to.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Lauren.
Hi. I'm just thinking about like the huge amount of content that has been produced in the last couple of seasons of the podcast and and you're going through another season at the moment. And I guess I'm just curious, in the process of engaging with such a huge amount of content and varied content, it's very different, for example, than digging in deep to one individual project. Like the podcast itself is a project, but there's such a huge amount of content. I'm wondering if one or both of you could say a little bit about how do you stay anchored in your own process in engaging with that much content, and how do you kind of, I guess, with the responsibility of thinking about a leader or teacher or trainer in Bowen theory, keep working on your own differentiation as part of that process, and not just get caught up in audience, listeners, marketing, all that sort of stuff, which is so much of the podcast world, I guess, as well. So I guess I'm asking about that process bit amidst the plethora of content that's being produced for this.
Dixie, do you want to take any of that on? I thought you were going a different direction with the content. I'm like, oh, it's just a lot. I don't know what we're doing with it.
Well, I don't know. Am I the only person that when they put on their makeup in the morning, they watch a Family Matters episode? Like, it's just sort of what I do. And someone asked what my hobbies are, and I'm like, my hobbies are reading for work, And so maybe that is just a little bit of how my DNA is to what does Dr. Papero say? Drinking from a fire hose. Like, that's kind of what I'm used to. That's a really good. I hadn't really thought of just how much kind of we're looking at. I think going into this season, like I said, we did 18 episodes in 18 weeks, and it was too much, but we did it. And this season we're doing it every 2 weeks, and I think it will give not just space for the editing and all that kind of work, but also, hopefully for a little bit more space to think and prepare as well. What about you, Katie?
I guess I'll chew on your question, Lauren, because I think it's useful to think about. One of the things that I have found, I really think, especially in that last season where we had so much, is I sort of picked a theme. And I picked the theme and I shared it today. Like, I really have been, my brain has been thinking about individuality and togetherness and differentiation. And so I think one of the ways I've kept myself not overwhelmed with all the content has been to keep going through that lens. And maybe that's reductionistic and doesn't, offer as much, but I think that has been useful to me. And I like the element of watching it on media. So, I do like to watch shows and think about, how could I use this example from media to think about Bowen theory? So I think that's the other part where I can keep a lightness to it. I don't know if that answered your question. And now I don't see you. So would you have anything you wanted to add, Lauren?
No, I think that's helpful. I think it's such an interesting medium to be experimenting with the theory and kind of putting stuff out there. And I'm constantly thinking here in Sydney, in Australia, kind of how to get Bowen theory a seat at the table, so I guess that's part of what I'm kind of keeping on mulling over as well. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. And I see there's 2 more questions and I think we're close to our end. So I will move on to Randy.
Yeah. What a creative way to kind of get theory out there. And one question I had is, do you have any sense of those who have attended these podcasts, how enlightened take the next step, whether that's attending a conference or enlisting in a training program? How is this sort of an introduction that gets built on over time? I know it's not going to be able to have exact statistics on any of that, but what's your sense?
Well, I think it's a great question that I'd be curious for the other network centers or other programs to just hear if they've had any of that thinking. One, I can name that people have moved towards living systems training programs who said, I heard this, my friend showed me this podcast, or someone showed me this podcast, and I want to learn more about this. So I have seen, I've seen, clients that have kind of said, my sister-in-law, I can think of one, my sister-in-law showed me this I think I need to think about my family, and so I think there has been anecdotally, it would be really interesting. I would love to hear from other centers if they've noticed. Because I also find it so interesting to find out, where do people hear about it? That client who was like his sister-in-law in New Brunswick found the podcast. And I thought, how did this, woman in New Brunswick find our podcast? I don't know. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's just anecdotally what I know, but it'd be really useful for us to hear if centers have heard, because I think that's helpful.
Maybe we could ask centers at the next network meeting to let you know who got introduced that signed up.
Yeah, that would be great. I love that.
All right.
Thanks, Randy.
Yeah.
Charles.
First of all, I want to say thanks, Dixie, for sending me your podcast. This is my first time attending, but I also noticed that, when it comes to the Bowen theory, I was going to ask more questions around the veteran populations, like how you guys are working with veterans, because I'm living in Mobile, Alabama, down south. And we have a lot of issues with veterans and suicide and things of that nature. So I want to know, is there any particular podcast you guys design specifically for veterans and the ones who are returning back from combat and dealing with trauma and anything of that nature?
Charles, that's a great question. I do not know the answer to it, but I would love to hear if anyone else, I think that topic alone would be really cool. If there was someone that had been working with veterans using theory, I think would be a very, very cool thing to hear about. So I will send your request, Charles, out to the network and the community to say, like, if people know of someone who's doing that work.
Or Family Matters episode.
Yeah, it would be great. So
Kathleen,
Dixie has your contact, so I will ask around, because I think that's really interesting. Kathleen, are you raising your hand because
Yeah, I would go toward Dr. Ted Beal, who at one point was on the faculty. I think he did a Family Matters on the topic, but he's also written a book. He worked at Walter Reed for a number of years with veterans coming back, and he's well steeped in the theory. So I would point you to him. BEAL, Dr. Ted Beal.
Thank you.
I want to add Jack Butler also, who he was Air Force, career Air Force, and and he did work a lot with veterans when he was down in Texas in his practice.
Great. So maybe we need to connect with one of those guys, Dixie, and see if they're willing to be on the podcast. I think I tried to reach out to Ted Beal, actually. So maybe someone who has a personal connection can connect us. I'm aware of time, so I'm going to move on to the next slide, because I want to make sure that we get on to Dixie telling us what is the next season. I thought I put this clip on here saying that this is a preview of what the next season might be talking about.
Yeah, so next season we are looking at mild, medium, and hot topics. And what makes something go from mild to hot? And the idea of what are the things that maybe you don't talk about at the dinner table because people are going to get riled up, and how is Bowen theory useful in thinking about some of those topics. Actually, I had a question in the chat, and I think she's left the call already, but she asked, I'm interested in connecting with other Asians who would like to work together to debunk the idea that Bowen is not applicable in Asian in some cultures. Is there a way to connect? And so we're actually doing an episode with Mabel from Living Systems about filial piety and sort of family expectations. And she'll bring her Asian culture perspective with that. So I think that's one. And then I'm sure there'll be links to other resources from that episode.
So I think unlike previous seasons, this season we are looking for people who have really done thinking in a topic, a hot topic around Bowen theory. So a little bit different in our format than same elevator pitch idea, but a little bit different in how we're approaching it than before. So I don't want to go over on time. So the other part that we're doing differently this season that I gave a little preview to is we did join up with this little buy us a coffee idea that we are putting out for the first time. We really thought through the idea of getting a sponsor and didn't like that idea of kind of connecting with one person on the resource. So really what we've decided is to put out this element as if this is useful to you. Maybe you can put a little, buy us a coffee. It's like a $5. You can make a $5 donation and support the work that puts the podcast together. So that's just one little thing that we did a lot of thinking about, this idea, and this is where we've landed. We'll see how that goes. But I think that I've said this quite a few times. So I think we get our ideas from talking with people and asking them what they want to hear about. So if any of you sitting in this room, knowing that we're thinking about these hot topics, or knowing about someone who's done a lot of thinking about a topic. So we've recorded a few. We did one in thinking about mental health. We've done, I'm blanking. What's the other one?
AI.
Yes. We had Patrick Stinson come on and think about Bowen theory and AI. So thinking about really what is a hot topic that you'd want to hear about, and is there a person who in Bowen theory that would be you'd like to see? And I'm running out of time for our pitch because we're over, right? Joe, we're over time.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to wrap us up. But
I was gonna say the new season comes out next Tuesday. That's when it's coming out. So look for that.
Thank you both. Go ahead, Joe. So much for joining us tonight. I know that I'm, as a super listener, I'm really looking forward to season 4 coming out. So thank you. And just a couple of announcements about an event that's coming up at the center. So on March 13th from 9:30 to 12:30, there'll be a clinical conference with Dr. Ann McKnight, who will be presenting Viewing Generations of a Family as a System. What difference does it make? And that will be online on Zoom. And then I hope to see you all next month for the March professional lecture, which will be on March 12th with Reverend Bob Abrams, called Being a Self from the Middle: Differentiation, Hierarchy, and the Work Environment. So, thank you again tonight, Katie and Dixie, for presenting, and thank you all for your questions and comments and for attending. And I hope to see you next month.
Thank you very much.